The EU-India FTA, boring but good. Now that the US has slashed tariffs from 50% to 18%, is this a permanent strategic shift or just a friendship discount that perhaps could vanish with the next tweet from the White House?
Asha, you've been in journalism long enough to know that there's no sentence in the English language that links Donald Trump and permanent. So let's not get carried away. You can talk to the Canadians, you can talk to the South Koreans, you can talk to the Europeans. He has shall we say, a record of being quite volatile on these things. Now, with that caveat out of the way, I think if 18% holds, then it is no doubt a great diplomatic and economic achievement for the Indian government, because 18% makes India competitive. It's better than India's competitors, both in South Asia, countries like Bangladesh, which, as you know, have very strong garments industries, and countries like Vietnam and Indonesia in Southeast Asia. So at one level, that's that's great. But I think the most important part of this is that it sends a signal to the entire world that there is no shadow hanging over the US-India relationship. And I think that's very important for investors going ahead. And it also kind of, suggests that India has handled this, I think, with a great deal of maturity. The government hasn't been baited to be intemperate. We'll have to look at the fine print, but based on what we know right now, my best sense is that the US administration has accepted a deal that India had put on the table a long time ago. And coming on the back of the India-EU deal, which I basically described the EU as boring. The deal actually is not particularly boring. The deal is significant. But these two large pieces of good news coming together back to back is certainly, on the international front, very, very good news for India.
Saranand, hi. One of the market veterans, Vallabh Bansali, told us that it's basically FOMO which has led to this decision. Do you think that's a right way to put it?
I think FOMO probably played a part in it. I think that I think the fact that India managed to push through the EU FTA, which, as you know, has been being negotiated for almost 2 decades now, right? So I think that would have created a push for the very simple reason that there are, many areas of the economy where the European companies and American companies are competitors. And you had the UK FTA before that. So I think that I think US businesses would not want to be in a position where, the UK has a good deal with India and the EU has a good deal with India, and they're on the outs. The other big pressure is that, across the board, both in terms of corporations and in terms of politicians on the Hill, there's been a long-standing consensus in Washington that the US-India relationship makes sense for the US for strategic reasons. And so that was another sort of element, I think, that would have weighed on decision makers in Washington, that you don't want to create a situation where you end up alienating India. And frankly, the 50% tariff was alienating because it was a punitive tariff. It was excessive. It was among the highest tariffs in the world. So it looks like they've come to a deal. Keep our fingers crossed. We'll have to see where this, ends up after looking at the fine print. But for now, I'm quite optimistic that they've pulled off something quite significant.
I want to talk about how the Russian oil trade-off piece is going to pan out, because Sadanand, it seems that this deal is quite hinging on India completely stopping Russian oil imports for now.
Yeah, look, I think you can look at that from two points of view. One is to look at it from a foreign policy perspective, and the other is to look at it from a purely economic perspective. From a purely economic perspective, it's a no-brainer for India. India was not consuming large amounts of Russian oil before 2022. I believe the Russian oil accounted for less than 1% of Indian imports, something around that figure. It moved. It saw an opportunity with Russian oil discounts after 2022. But you can't really compare the significance of Russian oil imports as just one item with the larger significance of the US-India economic relationship. These are not comparable. The US is India's largest market for goods. It's its largest market for services. It's India's most important technology partner. American tech firms are the most important investors in India in the GCC ecosystem. So there is no comparison. So perhaps you could say that, in an ideal world, India would like to be where it was, say, a year ago or 2 years ago, where it was in a position to both benefit from Russian oil and benefit from a close economic relationship with the US. But if it comes down to a choice, there is no choice. That's the first part. On the foreign policy perspective, I think it is a little bit awkward for the government because Trump doesn't believe in diplomatic niceties. The way he's phrased it and so on does create a certain amount of awkwardness. But I think the Indian government would behind the scenes be expecting President Putin and the Russians to recognize that this is realpolitik. These are compulsions. It's not as though India was dying to cut back on Russian oil, but when push comes to shove, it has to sort of weigh the options and weigh the interests of its own businesses and of its own people. And this is really a no-brainer.
I also want to talk about the Buy American commitment, because now that we've pledged this $500 billion in US energy and tech, does this sort of massive commitment to Buy American sort of, deviate from the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision? Or would you say that this is the only way to sort of secure India's growth as a manufacturing alternative to China, Sadanand?
So, Aisha, there's a very famous line that's often used about Trump, right? Which is that you should take him seriously, but not literally. And I think that is absolutely true when it comes to all these fantastical numbers that he likes to bandy about. Don't just look at his announcement about India. Look at the announcement that accompanied the U.S.-Korea deal, or look at the announcement that accompanied the U.S.-Japan deal. We're basically dealing with we're living in a world where when President Trump makes these announcements, he likes to attach really big numbers to them. If you notice that, if you looked at it carefully, you would see it doesn't say 500 billion over what period of time. It's quite possible that, yes, maybe India will import $500 billion worth over 5 years or 10 years or whatever. I think the intent is clear that India will be buying things from the US. I don't think that's but I really don't think people should get hung up on that $500 billion figure. I think that would be a mistake.
Okay, Sadanand, great to have you today on the show. Good to get in insights from you as always.
Good to be here. All the best.
Okay, let's take a very quick break, bracing ourselves